Hello, and welcome to the Cash News Podcast. Informative conversations about all things currency and cash. We'll share insights on the issues affecting the world of cash today, like cash security, payments technology, and the cash supply chain. Your hosts, Tom Meehan and Sean Ferrari, hope to inform industry professionals and support better cash security and management by sharing the latest information on trends, strategies, and technology. This is the Cash News Podcast. Now, here's Tom and Sean.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Cash News Podcast. Today, I have a special guest. Chris, I'm not going to butcher your last name, from OGC, is a partner. Why don't you tell the listeners a little about who you are, what OGC does, and your last name so I don't butcher it, even though I practiced it.
Any more than a couple of letters, I think, freaks some folks out. Trust me. It's Santomassimo. And thanks so much for allowing me to join the Cash News Podcast today.
Yeah, thanks for having us. It's important to note that Sean Ferrari is out in the UK right now, so he couldn't join. So my co-host gives everyone his best, and Chris, he apologizes for not being able to be here. Tricky when you have two live to have someone virtual. If we were all virtual, we do this. We are taping it live here in Bridgewater, New Jersey. Chris is a native New Jersey resident, so we're close, so this makes more sense. It's always nice to do it in person, too. So thanks for joining us.
Thank you. I think I'm more like you, actually. I'm a native New Yorker that moved to New Jersey some years ago. So thanks for having me on. Would love to just chat about some issues I think that are interesting to your listeners.
Yeah, but before we get into the issues, why don't you give just the listeners a little bit of an overview of who you are, your past, and what OGC does? Because I think it's always important. I'd love for them to hear what you do.
Yeah, OGC stands for Outside General Counsel. So OGC Solutions is a law firm in New Jersey. We have 20 lawyers that provide what I think is a really interesting and unique model as compared to virtually all other law firms that we've seen around the country. And that is, we want for mid-cap businesses to solve the issue that they have with how they use legal services. We want to provide them with a fixed fee option so that our entire firm of 20 lawyers can become a fractional legal department for the client. You know, just in a nutshell, the problem that I think mid-market companies face is that they aren't large enough or don't generate enough legal work to have a legal team in-house that focuses on their business and really understands their business. And if they did, they'd be paying a fixed fee, although it'd be more than they should be paying for, to have 20 lawyers inside. But what we've done at OGC Solutions is to create a team of people that have all the right skill sets to serve the mid-market companies in all of the relevant subject matter areas, but we can offer a fixed fee so that executives really can get used to bringing their lawyers in early and often, helping them manage risk and really just operate their businesses without having to step in a pothole on legal and regulatory issues because they made a bad decision not to use a lawyer when they needed one.
Yeah, outstanding. And typical for the listeners and the viewers that watch. We have much more listeners than viewers. We're going to kind of just go off the cuff and have a conversation. I know, Chris, you and I spoke a little bit about what the Cash News Podcast is. We talk about anything to do with payments, finance, cash, and current events. So would love to pick your brain from a legal aspect of some of the things you're hearing from your clients. Let's start with like a topic that I think is in everybody's minds, and artificial intelligence. Like, what are you hearing from your clients? What are some of the recommendations? I know that's a loaded question, but
yeah, it's not that it's a loaded question. It's just a really complex question. I think it's like any new technology, and that's so exciting, and that people get enamored by it. They're shocked in a good way about all the things that AI or machine learning can provide them in terms of making certain routine tasks easier. For example, everybody in our clients that does marketing, or they write proposals, or they're doing complex documents, feels like ChatGPT-4 is their savior, because all of a sudden, whenever they have a writer's block, or maybe when they don't even have a writer's block, they go to ChatGPT-4 and throw in a prompt, and they get a document that comes out that looks pretty good, or it's at least a really good start for what they need. But the legal issues go much deeper than that. Once you start asking a couple of legal questions about AI and machine learning, the list becomes huge, and with a lot of different layers. But the sort of the top of the list for us, number one, is intellectual property. Actually, maybe even before IP, I'll talk about privacy. We don't use ChatGPT-4 at our firm because if we would, we'd be essentially putting in front of the public whatever prompt we have, and that's how the machine learns, right? So we never want to expose our clients' information or anything confidential or privileged out to the rest of the world. But people sort of forget that once you do put something into ChatGPT or one of the other platforms, it's part of the public domain. So maybe another issue is that putting privacy aside is intellectual property. What kind of information are you putting into ChatGPT or one of the other platforms to generate the product that you want? Are you using protected information? Are you using someone else's copyrighted information? Are you using some sort of trademark material in terms of a logo, whatever it might be? People sort of forget sometimes that when you're on the internet, it's not just a free tool that you use in a vacuum, quite frankly. Again, you're participating in this massive project, and you got to be careful about what kind of information you expose to the rest of the world. Beyond that, intellectual property goes a little bit deeper. If you're a writer or maybe you're a marketing company that's providing copy for clients, if you're using one of those functions, well, first of all, I guess the customer theoretically might find out about it somehow. You might have noticed, too, there's a certain formatting that you get sometimes that really smacks of ChatGPT. But the question, I guess, for our clients and their customers is if we're going to use one of these platforms, there are ways to find out whether a document was generated in ChatGPT, of course. Is the company really providing the value to the client per the contract that's been written? And are they generating exactly what they promised to do? Those are just a really few examples that clients come to us about and say, how do I need to protect myself in this new world where all of my competitors are using these tools, and how do I stay competitive? One of the ways that we tell them to manage their functions is to have policies in place. So at least you've got some bumpers and some guidelines for your employees about what's okay and what's not okay in terms of how they use these different tools. We follow our own advice, and we have those for our firm as well. But as you can see, the layers of how this thing spiderwebs out and how it really impacts all aspects of business, I think, is still a bit unknown. Not a lot of case law, not a lot of judges. Frankly, I'm not even sure that a lot of judges fully understand it. I'm not sure that a lot of us really fully understand the impact. But I think there's a lot of answers to come, but we don't have a lot of them yet.
Yeah, I have one more question on AI before I switch to data privacy. What are your thoughts on one of the things that I'm seeing, and I speak a lot about AI, and I do a lot in that space, mostly around risk. What are your thoughts on some of the automated legal services that AI has today? There are a lot of companies that are, real-time contract review, real-time review of legal documents. So I equate it to some of the website lawyers that you don't actually talk to anybody that does everything, to now there are services out there that are selling as we do contract review with AI in real time. What are your thoughts on that?
I've seen and I've tested out a couple of different tools over the last 2 years. Well, like anything else AI related, you have to be really, really careful. And I think no matter whether you're writing an analysis of something or reviewing a contract, if you as the user don't really understand what you're looking at, the product that you might get back just may not even fit the particular transaction or the litigation or whatever it is. And you really have to be able to analyze. The product may give you a nice head start, but it's not going to really do the analysis for it. I think so far as I've seen that AI, when it comes to contracts, sometimes helps, do summaries of things, or might catalog. If you got 10 contracts in a folder, and there are certain tools that'll tell you when they all expire, when they're effective, and you can tag certain things. For summary purposes, it could be helpful. But I think it's still really raw on the analysis part. Like, for example, I was testing out ChatGPT about a year ago. A new opinion came down from, I think, the New Jersey Supreme Court, and I gave it the site and told it to summarize it for me, and it got it completely 180 degrees backwards, right? Just because it doesn't have that analytical capability. So you got to be really, really careful. And some commercial contracts, like if you're going to talk about a sale of goods contract, there are not going to be so many local nuances in those contracts. But if you get into more, you get into areas like trust and estates, certain government contracts, for example, there's a real risk that you're going to get it wrong because there may be that local nuance that the AI functions don't pick up. So I would be very, very cautious about it. And unless the user is an expert in whatever the subject matter is, I think it's a real mistake to rely on AI. This is not to promote our business or anything, or promote the legal services business. I just think you got to be super careful.
Yeah, no, I think it's commendable what you just said, though, because what you said, that is, first of all, I agree 100%, is that it's not don't use it, it's understand how to use it. So, I agree. I love, I do a lot of research and a lot of reviews. It's nice when I can say, find me everywhere it says this in real time, and find me dates. And yeah, I could do that in Word, but have it summarizing. That's exactly where I think the use cases are really beneficial for folks. I do a fair amount of contract review myself, and I would say that there are nuances in every one. Probably there are some things that are boilerplate that it would probably get right 99% of the time, but those aren't where you need the help,
right?
Because they're boilerplate. Like you don't need, you're always going to write that sentence the same way. But I genuinely think with generative AI or ChatGPT specifically, some of the summarization features, if you're looking for things, are very good. I also, and I speak about this, actually I'm going to speak about it in 2 weeks at a conference of, your comment about the case law not getting it right. I actually have seen examples where what it wrote wasn't wrong, but the interpretation was incorrect.
Right.
So it wasn't factually wrong, it was the way it was interpreting it. And it was just because it's trying to figure it out, and you sometimes need a human. There's an art and a science to a lot of things. So I think you're spot on there.
Well, there was a case in New York a few months ago where an attorney asked one of those functions to write a brief.
Yep.
And you probably saw the story, given the smile on your face. It made up case law that didn't even exist.
Well, I think if we're talking about the same, so I actually speak about this this week. There was one in New York, and I can't remember the other state, but the one in New York, which was interesting, was nobody caught it. A law clerk caught it. The judge didn't catch it. The attorney didn't. A law clerk said, "I don't know that. Let me look that up. That's a good one." And my thing there was, you had a room full of people and someone who was just curious caught it and said, "This isn't real." Yet it went on, and I don't know if it ended up being a disbarment, but that's one of those things that I stopped reading on it, of that those are real things that can happen.
Oh, for sure.
And I don't think there's anything wrong with using it as a tool, but you really have to validate, especially if you're using case law. I always say that. I used to do a lot of things in my past where people would go, "What's your opinion?" And I'd go, "Well, I got to read. I don't have an opinion until I'm sure I'm right on what I'm reading." Because if you don't read the whole thing, it isn't always that simple.
No doubt.
And case law can be very, very interesting, especially new stuff. So he cited something that was new, that wasn't real.
So new.
He said, that wasn't real. And the reality is ChatGPT is really good at making it look real.
Yeah.
Really good.
Yeah.
Citing, when you read it, it's going to write it well usually. The hallucination or the black box events are really, with any AI, a risk, as I would say in your space, probably more than other spaces, because if you're an attorney, you really could put yourself in a lot of hot water.
For sure. That's going to be an interesting billing discussion with the client.
Yeah.
So you charged me for 10 hours to write that brief, and apparently you didn't. So
yeah, I think that's going to be an interesting one. So you mentioned data privacy. I'm always interested in data privacy. On the Cash News podcast, we talk a lot about, and this may not have crossover, but I think it does. We talk a lot about digital currency and privacies around that. But what are you hearing in general about data privacy from your customers, and what are some recommendations you might have today?
Well, I think it depends on the context. If you're talking about data privacy in terms of website terms, that's an issue that comes up quite often. Having proper terms that cite all the right statutes and the right requirements, that's really important. But the message there is that your policies really need to be specific about what you're going to do with information that you collect on the site. So that's not so hard. Another area that we spend a lot of time in is dealing with commercial printers that to put pieces in the mail, either transactional mail or marketing mail. The issue there is that they're getting data. Sometimes it's protected health information, PHI. Others it's PII. And so there's a whole host of issues down the timeline of when our client, the printer, gets the information from their customer, what they do with it after the job is done, how they manage it while they have it, and how they protect it from cyber events, so to speak, right? Or protect it from unintended releases. So there's a whole host of issues there, but I think the name of the game is making sure that folks are, following best practices when it comes to their IT systems, that they're following the requirements of whatever certifications that they may have relating to that. Another area that comes up, and I know this is sort of bouncing around a little bit, but what kind of insurance coverage do they have for the events that may happen? And you and I were talking before the podcast, some people, I think, make the error that cyber coverage, so to speak, is going to cover all of what happens in the course of that timeline. Cyber coverage is going to help a client that gets an intrusion, and a lot of times the insurance companies are providing a lot of really effective resources to help companies recover, which is great. But I think there's often a miss when folks think they're covered by the cyber policy, but meanwhile they're writing their own code, creating their own customer portals for the receipt of that information, and they don't realize that they're not covered there. It's going to be a professional liability or an errors and omission coverage. So you could see there's a lot of issues that really follow this entire life cycle of a customer transaction, and I would say that our clients are concerned about. It's going to depend a little bit, but they're definitely concerned about what's the aftermath of an event, like how do they prepare for it. It's almost like they're doing all of the right things from a process and a tech standpoint. They've got all the right policies, and they're just sort of holding their breath, hoping that they just don't have to deal with an event because it is so traumatic for the companies.
Yeah.
And then the last piece is that clients are, I think, becoming more and more aware in a good way of the fact that many of these events happen because of some employee issue, not a malicious issue, but rather a negligence or a mistake. Somebody that clicks on the wrong email or clicks on a phishing attempt and really lets some of these intruders into their system. So more and more, I think companies are spending the time and the effort and the money to make sure that their employees are well trained. We do the same kind of thing at our firm. But more and more clients are realizing that it's certainly they have to put up the castle wall to prevent the outside from coming in, but the threat quite often is going to be inside more often than not.
Yeah, you got to my next question, which was on insurance, and I think it is a complicated piece, and I tell everybody get some help because you probably need a product liability. You need a whole bunch of different coverages that aren't going to all be in your cyber policy. And you need to make sure you have the right riders in your cyber policy. And if you're a small business or a mid-sized business, you need to make sure you have a CRIM policy, that you have the right coverage there. Because if it's an insider threat issue, you might not get the coverage you think you get. And then cyber generally is more about remediation and information. It's less about the liability, more about that. And the liability riders get very expensive.
Yeah.
And you're starting to see, at least from my side, customers requiring more as well. So it's an ever-changing world.
Yeah, on the customer side, we see a lot of contracts that ask for the world. But what we try and do is help both sides sort of right-size what the requirements are to fit the transaction. In some other places that we see the cyber issue coming up is when companies are doing mergers and acquisitions transactions, to really do the diligence, to look at the company that they're going to buy or invest in, to really be sure about what the cyber position really is, or the technological platform that's in place. Dive deeper than just making sure that all the PCs and the laptops work. The one of the really infamous cases was the SolarWinds case that came out a few years ago, and that whole issue was because of a PC that was in some faraway small facility within the network of companies that were purchased, and it wasn't up to date in terms. I think it was on Windows XP, and there were all kinds of issues where it just provided an easy avenue for transition. But unfortunately, SolarWinds made a lot of representations about what they had allegedly done or what the status of their tech platform was, and that was really the downfall of the company. So really just making sure that IT is really going to be as high on the list of diligence items as accounting and finance, for example.
Yeah, and that's a great point. I mean, I think third-party liability of understanding, what your vendors do and what your partners do, because you can be as buttoned up as possible, but if you're using someone that isn't, especially in the environment that you cater to, where you have a lot of managed service providers providing IT resources that, could create holes for you. I think response, so when you say that, it doesn't shock me. I often say response is more important than anything else. You have to have the right due diligence and prevention in place. But if you're not prepared to respond to a challenge, I think that's what kills brands. When you don't have a firm response action to say, this is what I'm going to do, this is how I'm going to respond. And I arguably tell people all the time that, we spend so much time talking about preventative, which to me is, the cost of doing business. Like you got to lock your doors. Mm-hmm. But, what happens, if there's an issue or when there's an issue in most cases, are you prepared for it? Do you understand what the response is? Are you taking into your brand equity what it means? Do you understand how your customers are going to respond to it? Do you actually have a real business continuity plan? Do you really have a recovery plan? Is it just something that was written and isn't actionable? So those are all things that are really important.
For sure, and about response plans. I know that a lot of or many of your listeners are finance professionals, CFOs in particular. Yeah. We love interfacing with CFOs. CFOs, in my opinion, have become more than just financial folks. They're really, in many cases, chief administrative officers and chief operations officers in some companies. The reason I raise it here, though, is that the CFO in many companies is the person that can sort of take control of all the functions and bring them together to actually practice and prepare for those events, to actually plan on what happens, not just focus what's on the paper, but actually do some drills, if you will, to get ready for those events. And how are we actually going to execute and really bring together the tabletop exercise about how this is going to work when we do have. And it's not a when, it's not an if anymore. It seems to be a when, right? For sure.
Yeah. So it's interesting you said CFOs being operators. So at Control Tech, our CFO is also our chief operating officer. Mm-hmm. So we changed and combined that role, and I think it was a really good strategic move, because to your point, it allows the two to intersect, and there's crossover at a really nauseam level. So why not, if you have an individual that can manage both, do it? And so we do that today, and I think it is actually a really good recipe, because that not only are they pulling or controlling the numbers, but it's the execution and the operations behind it. Yep. So you mentioned CFOs and finance professionals in general. What are you hearing is their number one concern today? Yeah.
I think that's a tough question, because I think it really depends on the company. The poor CFOs, I think, are especially when they have a dual role like yours, they're worried about the economic conditions, for sure. The cost of capital has been an issue. Inflation has been an issue. So anything finance is really, I think, naturally at the tip of their tongues and the top of their list of concerns. Beyond that, I think people issues, because in some companies the CFO is the officer to whom the HR function reports. Yep. And so they're worried about managing people, especially in this new environment where many of the folks work from home at least part of the week, if not the entire week. That's really been a huge change in the workplace that I think impacts everything we're talking about today, whether it's cyber issues, whether it's employee satisfaction, whether it's managing their IT, whatever it is. This whole remote work movement, and I don't have an opinion either way. I think it depends on the company, but it's just one more complicating factor of ensuring that people are productive and happy and marching to the same drummer, if you will.
Yeah, that wasn't a topic I thought about, but that's always a topic that, Sean and I, when we do the podcast, we always seem to go back to, because we started this podcast during COVID. We actually got on a call and said, like, how do we create a platform to give information? Because my co-host is the VP of an organization called Currency Research, which is really a research organization that puts events on for the financial industry globally. Mm-hmm. And he's an ex-Federal Reserve person. And the podcast I did was, how do we drive information to try to just keep information going? And it grew legs. And one of the things I'm often talking to people about is that balance of what's good and what's bad in remote work. So and it's funny, I say the same thing. While I'm neutral in the overall conversation, it really has a lot to do with the company and what you're doing. And
it does.
I don't know that there's a right or a wrong answer. I'm not sure, based on, maybe I'm a little old school. I think that, you have to do some things in person. I just feel like it makes a difference. So I certainly think if you're managing a product team or R&D, there's a big difference of sitting in a room versus doing that. But I'd also say just even us getting a chance to meet in person, you don't get the same connection. If we had a phone call to talk about what we did, at least I wouldn't get the same connection.
I agree with you. I think especially when you're in a general counsel role or a president role, when you get a bunch of business people together, quite often you're going to learn more in the discussions you're having outside the main meeting, and so you don't get that same flavor when you're on Zoom or Teams, because when the call's over, it's over, and you're disconnecting and you're moving on to the next thing.
Exactly. Yeah.
So I agree 100%, but. When you change the lens a little bit and you're focused on how do I manage people, some people are suspicious about remote workers, other folks are not. I think it adds one more layer of complexity to keeping people happy, for sure. Accountability can be difficult, but I often tell folks, if somebody is not a great employee outside and working remotely, they probably weren't great when they worked in the office either.
Yeah, I agree. I think I think good people are good, and I think where they, if you have a hardworking individual that work everywhere hardworking, I still tend to feel like you get more accomplished together. True. But that has nothing to do with the ethic of the person. That has to do with if you're asking a question in person, asking in real time, having the engagement. So, and I'm not sure that I think in all fields that will continue the realm. I think we're going to see an interesting next year or so of what happens with real estate, because some commercial real estate is going to be challenged. But I know in the sectors that I spend a lot of time in, there are very different opinions. The financial industry tends to want people back. That I talk to. And I don't want to say wholly, but most of the folks I do, and they're trying to figure out what the right balance is. And it's, at least at a C level, it's not I don't trust my worker, it's that that's not the comment. The comment is, in order to truly be engaging, you need to be connected. And, flexible work's important for people, but how do you make sure that you get both?
And I would venture to say that the balance, number one, is going to be different for each company, but I'm not sure that any of the larger companies have really found that true balance yet.
No, and it's tough, because you don't want that to be the deciding factor for talent. You really want that to be, and at least from my perspective of running this company, is like, if that's the first thing that comes up, I immediately say, like, that's not the factor of what we want to look at. We want to look at the culture and the flexibility, for sure.
Right.
And I think it's a new nuance. So you mentioned a whole bunch of really good stuff. I guess my last question is, if for the listeners that are thinking about legal challenges or things they should be concerned about, is there anything today in 2024, that if you were talking to a mid-market person or even a larger person that should be on the radar that you might not think is, doesn't matter what it's related to?
It's really hard to isolate specific legal issues, I think. I mean, we're all concerned with a lot of the same categories of things, employment and intellectual property and some of the things we mentioned today. But I guess I would say to an executive or a business owner that no matter what industry you're in, the most effective way to think about these issues is to put your business first. That is, understand what your goals are and where are you today and where are you trying to get to. And your management of legal and regulatory issues really should flow from the business. You shouldn't be hamstrung by or think you're hamstrung by the law and legal issues or the risk associated with them. Because I think if you're not driving toward the business with a focus on we're going to get there, we're going to figure out how to get there, as opposed to no, you can't because the law says X. Don't be afraid of the law so much. You should have somebody, whether it's internally or a lawyer that speaks the same language and can understand what you're trying to achieve, and then create an organized plan around it. So we never want to be the no guys. We want to be the yes, but, or we're going to get you there, but we just have to go in a slightly different route to get you there.
I'd say that's some great advice. And then as talking in the risk field all the time, I've never heard anybody say that, but it's a really great way to look at it. Is don't be afraid of the law. Like don't make decisions based on that. Figure out how to partner with the right people that give you the right level of understanding. There is risk in everything.
For sure.
So if you're making your decisions based on that, you will hold your business back for sure.
No doubt.
So that was great. So before we transition, one thing I didn't mention is you're a fellow podcaster. So why don't you give our listeners a little bit on your podcast, how they can listen to it, and then how they can get in touch with you or OGC.
Fantastic. And as I said before, we apparently read the same book on how to do a podcast, because our focus is a lot like yours. It's called the Think Factory Podcast. You can catch it on our website, thethinkfactory.com, or on Apple, Google, and Spotify. And it's a lot like the Cash News Podcast. It's really a thought leadership series intended to spotlight interesting folks that can share some information about their experiences, their companies, and we like to help folks get in front of new potential clients or customers in that realm. So feel free to reach out to us on the website. Again, it's thethinkfactory.com. And our law firm is called OGC Solutions. The website is ogcsolutions.com, and we'd love to have a conversation with you.
Great. Chris, thank you so much for being on. I appreciate it. Hopefully you'll be on again, and you're more than welcome to join us anytime.
Excellent. The same with you.
And it was great to have you here in Bridgewater in the offices, which is not always what we get to do.
Which I told you, very impressive. Really nice. So
thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening to the Cash News Podcast. We hope you found this episode insightful. Don't forget to like and review us on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. Follow us on LinkedIn and Twitter, and be sure to visit us at thecashnews.com to stay up to date with the latest on the world of cash. Thanks again for listening to the Cash News Podcast.